Jaleh herself and her team are amazing experts in growth. They will share this content today from a lived experience of having actually done this in companies like Gusto, for example. So this is not some theoretical framework. This is something that this team has firsthand experience doing. Now, everybody knows that going forward in this new reality, cash is king, and preserving cash and extending your runway is one of the most important things that you need to do. Having said that, you still need to find ways to grow. You need to grow responsibly. You need to grow profitably. And I'm really excited that Jaleh and her team are going to share with us again, very concrete steps that you can take in order to preserve your runway, extend your runway, but at the same time, continue investing in your business and continue growing your business. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jaleh and her team.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thanks so much. And I also have Henry here who leads finance at Mutiny. Henry and I worked together at Gusto. He led biz ops for the go-to-market team. I led marketing. And so we were partners in trying to implement and build a very efficient growth engine, which Gusto's SMB business model required us to do. So we've gathered some of those lessons here and wanted to share them with you. As Bogomil mentioned, it's no surprise, right? We're hearing this from investors from every direction that capital was cheap, now it's expensive, so we have to be more efficient. And of course, certainly in the past couple of years, that's not been the focus. So most companies haven't necessarily had to develop the discipline of how do you grow profitably and efficiently with an eye on the unit economics. Now, I think Bogomil mentioned this. Jason Lemkin is another one of our investors. I think he puts it really nicely, which is you can cut your way to solvency, but you can't cut your way to growth. And ultimately, we all need to continue to grow. This is some of the investor expectations shared from David Sachs. And certainly, being in a recession is not really a free pass for slow growth, especially for all of us here, Sequoia companies. We're all trying to build big, iconic businesses. And the expectation is that we continue to grow. But the question becomes, how do you grow the right way in this new environment? And so, everyone here should be in one of these 2x2 boxes. If you're a Sequoia company, you've probably already figured out how to not be on the left-hand side of this 2x2. So on the x-axis, we have cash. On the y-axis, we have efficiency. Obviously, the first step here is to get yourself into a space where you have a lot more runway. And, I know that Sequoia's recommendation is to get to free cash flow, to cash flow positive. For us, we're leveraging a 4-year minimum runway. But 30 months seems to be sort of the lowest amount of cash that investors are recommending, as well as efficiency, so a burn multiple of 1.5 or less. Once you're on the right-hand side, which means you have the right amount of runway, the question is, okay, how do you invest in profitable growth so that you can continue to build the business that you set out to build? And so when it comes to the blueprint for profitable growth, Henry and I were like, we need a 1-week workshop to really teach this. And of course, we only have an hour with you all. And so we decided to pick out the 4 topics that we felt were the most important and relevant, and probably things that you may not be getting from other channels in order to make this hour together as potent as possible. So we'll start with demand programs and talk a little bit about how you can rein in that spend and be a little bit more efficient, because that's where the bulk of your growth budget is going to go. Then we'll talk about conversion and how to squeeze more revenue and juice out of the total spend that you're putting into marketing and growth. And then we'll talk briefly about how to launch new programs so that you are as fast and as budget focused as possible. And then finally, Henry will talk about the operating cadence, like how can you be thoughtful and deliberate about how you want your team to report and share information so that you can continue to keep an eye on profitable growth. So starting with demand, I know we have a mixed audience here. We've got some people in finance, some in marketing, some founders. So we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page about what does it even mean to build a growth engine and what are the pieces involved. At the highest level, we have two divisions, demand and conversion. And then from there, demand tends to be where marketing teams are the most focused. And we split up demand into three different types of programs. So we've got, based on where the audience is at. So we've got the buying audience. These tends to be the smallest audience, but the easiest to acquire because they're ready to purchase your product. And really not just your product, but they're ready to purchase a product for a specific problem. So they're typically ready to evaluate between a few different solutions. And you can get to these folks through SEO, AdWords, partnerships, where the person can raise their hand and then you can, pop in and say, great, like we have a solution for you. The next group that's larger is the learning group. So these are folks that might have a purchase timeline of 3 to 12 months, they're open to it, and it's up to you to convince them that this is the right time and add urgency and get them to engage. And then the largest group is your total addressable market. These are all of the folks that are in your ideal customer profile, but they may not necessarily be ready to purchase. They might not even be aware of your category. So you have a lot of education to do to get these folks to slowly mature and eventually become customers. On the conversion side, pretty much every company, and this session is obviously focused on B2B. So all B2B companies have sales to get these customers to get these prospects to become customers and revenue. The more modern companies also invest in either growth engineers or no-code technology or a combination to drive conversion alongside the sales team. And on the whole, if the things at the bottom of this are easier to acquire, but the volume is lower. And as you move up to the top, the size of your audience grows, but they obviously become more expensive because they're not ready to purchase. And so the thing that I want to leave with everybody here is that you want to make sure that your growth engine has all of these elements in it. If you cut any of these elements off, then you are going to not be growing as efficiently, which for me, efficient growth and fast growth are the exact same thing, right? Because you set your unit economics up front, and then whatever growth you can drive that's within those acceptable unit economics is yours to have, especially in this market. And so the more efficient you are, the faster your company can grow, and you need all of these elements to do that. So now I'm going to hand it over to Henry to just touch on what efficient growth means in the simplest terms possible. And then we'll start to evaluate some programs together.
Okay, thank you, Jaleh. So yeah, I'm going to start us off with a really simple definition here: 12-month payback period as the benchmark for profitable, efficient growth. So there's definitely other ways of evaluating efficient growth, and there's definitely cases where it can make sense to stretch beyond the 12-month threshold as a metric, particularly for very strong LTV models. However, we have noticed that as the cost of capital is rising, investors are taking a more skeptical eye to some of these longer time horizon LTV models. So simple definition here: just revenue from a new customer fully pays back the acquisition costs of that customer in a 12-month period of time. So typically sales makes up roughly 60% of CAC in most software business models that we see. The sales and marketing ratio can vary a bit by business model. Marketing typically takes on a larger proportion of the total costs of acquiring a customer. As you start selling into smaller customers, and marketing really takes on the role of automating a buyer journey and reducing as many sales touch points as possible. So one other point to make here is just, it's worth noting, like when we talk about going into a new environment, in the past 6 months, we've seen a significant shift in public company valuations that very clearly demonstrates that companies that are the best at profitable growth are being valued meaningfully higher relative to their peers. And not just a public company thing, that's just where it's most observable on a daily basis. Companies getting priced based on how investors think their prospects are and really what the true value of that company is. Okay, so running through a quick example here. Some of this might be kind of basic, but I think it's good level setting before we get into thinking about like how and potentially where we would want to cut. This is good at unit economic, just baselines. So in this example of allowable CAC costs, we are assuming we have a 12-month threshold for CAC with a customer ACV of 100K. So illustrative case, in this case, it's selling to very big customers, but we could scale ACV down to 10K or 1K, and the exact same concepts would hold here. So because we earn 100K from this customer over the first 12 months, we're able to spend 100K to acquire them. We'll assume sales costs here at 60% of total, so that'd be 60K. We definitely recommend confirming sales costs to lock in this piece of the cost structure or CAC. And that simplifies target setting significantly for marketing once you're able to do that. So now we have 40K remaining to spend on marketing for a single new customer with some pretty simple funnel conversion math, assuming 25% conversion rate from an opportunity to a new customer. Do the simple math here, we can determine that we can spend 10K per opportunity, and pushing that further up the funnel, 1K per lead. Next thing that I wanted to talk about here is just like what actually goes into marketing CAC and how we think about that, and doing it at the program level specifically. So a lot of I'd say the very first step in CAC maturity is just understanding what it is at a blended level. What's much more valuable is getting down to the program level and understanding what the component pieces of that is. So we tend to find it's most useful to bucket it as people costs, program costs, and technology divided by the new customers acquired by program. And critically, that by program piece is really important. Going even further from here, understanding like the marginal costs in the channel, and Jaleh will talk a little bit about that, but with a really granular understanding of the cost structure, you're able to understand if we were trying to increase volume in this channel by 10%, how would our costs scale in line with that volume? All right, so on the next slide here, just a simple example. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but as a leave behind, quick example of how we think about calculating this for 3 different programs. This is a community program, an events program, and an ad program. You have the cost of the team that's working on these programs, the program cost. This could be spend in a lot of cases for like LinkedIn or Google AdWords, and then the technology to deliver that. Divide that by the number of new customers, and you get a marketing CAC for these programs and can compare it relative to the target marketing CAC that we determined in the prior slides. And with that, I will hand it back to Jaleh to talk a little bit more about how she thinks about evaluating these different programs beyond just the numbers.
Awesome. So before I get into that, I just want to share some, just-in-time metrics on how other marketing leaders are approaching their budgets this year. We do CMO dinners. We also have surveyed marketing leaders and asked them, how they're approaching their budgets. And on the whole, what we're hearing is about a quarter of the folks have had to cut relatively deep. This tends to be companies that, really maybe kept their eye off of profitability for the past few years and were relying on fundraising, doing a really big round this year with really high multiples. And when the market shifted, they had to cut pretty deep in order to get themselves on a good path. The majority of the folks are in this spring cleaning bucket. So they're looking to cut 10 to 20% as they look at their budget for the next 12 months and asking themselves, hey, given the uncertainty, is there headcount that we can push back that we don't necessarily need right now? Or are there programs that we were investing in that we just think are going to be under serious scrutiny because it's harder to make them profitable? Is there other things that we want to reallocate our spend to in order to get to more efficiency? So really healthy spring cleaning. And then about a quarter of folks are not really cutting because they were so underinvested in marketing. Maybe they had really good product market fit and they were relying pretty much on product to drive growth, and they've just started investing in marketing. And a good reminder here is if of your CAC budget, 35 to 40% goes towards marketing, that means that your marketing budget should be about 40% of new ARR. So if you're significantly below that amount, you probably don't even need to cut that much to begin with. Although I definitely still recommend going through the next set of steps in order to become even more lean and more effective. So now that we know how much we want to cut, what do we actually cut? I'm an engineer, and so I tend to like, when I got into marketing, I wanted everything to be a science, right? Let's apply a formula and the good ones stay and the bad ones go. And what I learned over my time being the head of marketing at Gusto was that there's actually a bit of art to it. And if you are overly sort of scientific, you're going to end up cutting what feels like fat, but it's actually muscle or bone, and it's going to slow down your growth. So what I want to do in this section is try to, through examples, share a little bit more about the art and where you need to forgive programs that might be unprofitable in order to not slow down your long-term growth, because on the whole, the blended CAC is still going to work. So we start with program level CAC because it is the most strict measure of profitability. And so the things that it says is good are going to be great. And the things that it says are bad, we still want to apply a layer of marketing wisdom to it before we cut those things off. So typically it ends up spitting out what I would say is 3 buckets of bad programs. And those tend to be, one is unprofitable. Like you do the math, you expected maybe 100 customers from that channel every month and you're getting 50. So it's very clearly unprofitable. And then we have marginally unprofitable. And then we have programs where it's very, very difficult to prove their profitability by tracing all the way from demand to customers. So let's start with unprofitable. The question that I ask around these programs is it strategic? And you might think that feels like, duh, obviously it should be strategic. You'd be surprised in a fast-moving environment how many programs make it onto the stage that aren't necessarily going to be strategic for you. And everyone's going to have these because the last 2 years were absolutely crazy. And so strategic for me breaks down into 3 things. Scale. So is in a year from now, when we have tripled our ARR, are we still going to care about this program, or is its contribution going to be too small, like where we will have outgrown it? Programs that can scale with you are a lot more important for you to invest in early. The second is differentiation. We have a lot of founders on this call. You probably think a lot about that when it comes to building your core product. The exact same concept applies to marketing, because you have all sorts of people, not even your competitors, but just other people selling to your ideal customer profile that are trying to get their attention through the exact same programs like content or advertising. And for you to have good unit economics and continue to scale your program, you need to be a lot better than everybody else. So you have to ask yourself the hard question of, what is our team DNA? What are we good at? What's the market standard for this program? And do we have a path to being a lot better than everybody else at this, or at least being in the top 10% of what's out there? The last piece is just profitability. You want to make sure that you can break this down and have line of sight, and that the unit economics of the program are going to work for your business model. So for example, at Gusto, we were SMB. There was a whole bunch of program types that just didn't really work for us because they were too expensive. And our ACV did not allow us to go after those types of programs. And that's something that you can calculate right out of the gate. So with that, what I would do is cut and simplify the programs that are not going to be strategic for you, and instead double down on the ones that are going to be really big and valuable for you. One thing that I learned as a marketing leader was that, initially I was much more sensitive to what do we cut, because different people were working on those programs, and I assumed there was a bit of attachment to the program. What I learned over time was that my team really liked it when we cut and simplified things, and they didn't mind being reallocated from one program to another. And all they cared about was, are we having a big impact on the company? And so those were much easier conversations to have. And I say that here because, you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your company and for your team, and not being overly precious about, not hurting people's feelings or cutting their programs. The couple of examples that I'll share here is we added an outbound email program at Gusto because we had competitors that were, other companies that were really successful with that. And we just were having a tough time making it work. Our team's DNA was very much focused on inbound. We didn't really have a head of SDR that we could partner with to make this sort of outbound outreach work for us. And I remember having some of my best people on the program running through super rigorous A/B testing to try to make this thing work. And we just didn't have really good alignment of DNA with the program. And, so it failed on a couple of these different strategic vectors. That's a great example of a program that I would cut at a time like this and reallocate those people to something else that I think is going to work for us. An example of a program at Mutiny that we are not cutting, even though it's unprofitable technically, is a community program that we launched. Our opinion is that the program is going to have massive scale because we've seen it relative to other companies that were in similar stages that launched the program. And in addition to that, it is a very strategic program for us because we're creating a new category. And this new category requires a lot of education that comes in the form of community and people sharing their best practices. And so we're willing to bet on it, even though the math does not work out just yet at this early stage of the program. So, I say all of this because you should feel comfortable to make decisions based on your wisdom and your instincts. Not everything has to be dictated from the math. If you really believe in something and you want to bet on it, I definitely recommend that you do that. Just make sure that you don't have 7 strategic programs that you're investing in. So you do have to simplify and cut a little bit. The second one is marginally unprofitable. This one's pretty straightforward. It means that CAC was good for some portion of the scale. And as you increase your scale, CAC started to go bad, right? It started to really increase. So maybe on the whole, the program looks unprofitable. And what you want to do here is cut at the bad marginal CAC and then start experimenting around the edge to find the next lucrative sliver to keep scaling the program. Paid ads, great example. As you increase the scale, you have to continue to go out to increase to new audiences. Initially, you tend to have really profitable audiences. And then as you expand maybe to new keywords that are less related to exactly what your company does, you start to lose some of that efficiency. In a market like last year, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of us just completely expanded our budgets and didn't really care, what parts was unprofitable. This is a great time to cut that back, move back into a smaller budget for experimentation until you get to the next, lucrative layer, and reallocate that budget to something else. Another example of this is, for example, at Gusto, we had an events program to acquire accountants, which were a big partner program for us. We really wanted to have one playbook that we could stamp out at all of these different events that accountants went to. And the reality was that we were really successful and profitable in the events that attracted modern accountants. And then as we expanded to regional events, those were a lot less profitable for us. And so that's another example of marginal CAC being bad. What you would want to do at a time like this is cut those regional events out and instead have a smaller team focus on trying to get the playbook right for those regional events. The third bucket is the can never prove profitability. I would say as an engineer, when I started out in marketing, I didn't believe in this bucket. I thought it was made up and it was just an excuse to not measure certain things. And what I learned over time was that there is actually a bucket in marketing that is very difficult to measure with first touch or last touch at a measurement, which is how we calculate the program level CAC. But when you start to invest in it over time, all of your cost of acquisition starts to go down. And so those 2 buckets that I've seen, one is educational programs. A lot of content falls into this, where if you look at how many customers came out of this ebook download, you're not going to get a very good number. But the reality is that a lot of your customers are interacting with that content and are getting nurtured. I recommend not using program level CAC for measuring those types of things, and instead use multi-touch attribution. You can either use a tool that does that. Ryan can maybe add a couple of the names into the chat for us, or you can even do it manually to see which of these touch points are present in the folks that become customers. And that's how you can start to optimize some of that content. Brand is the second bucket. And so, I remember at Gusto, there was a point where I felt like we were operating in such an effective way with our testing and experimentation. And yet it was really hard. It felt like we were coming up against a glass ceiling. And that's when we started to invest really creatively in brand. And over the next, 6 to 12 months, we started to see the benefit of that. All of our CPCs started to go down, and a lot of things that we were having a really hard time, improving started to just get better as the market became more familiar with us, as we started to reach the tipping point of around 20%-ish awareness. Everything just started to get a little bit easier. And so my recommendation for brand is keep it, but maybe set a lower budget, because you probably do need to cut a little bit out of the budget that you had relative to the past couple of years. And move away from things that are really expensive, like display ads and YouTube ads, to more creative brand spend. And as inspiration, I'll leave one example here with you on brand. I was a judge a few weeks back on the Marketing Emmy Awards, where marketers presented their most creative marketing campaigns. And there was anything from big, Super Bowl ads that were really awesome and creative, to massive conferences. And then there was, this example, which was just as effective, but had a very different cost structure. So this was by Domino Data Lab. They sell to data scientists, and they decided to write a book on data science for children. And so all of their prospects were so excited that they could finally explain what, the parents do to the children, and they would buy this book and, read it to their kids. Cost them $30,000, drives 30% of their pipeline. So great opportunity for you to take a step back and ask your team, what are we really good at as a team? Like, what is our unique special sauce? Because every team has a DNA. And then use that to come up with more creative ways of generating awareness around yourself. Finally, on the demand programs, I'd say this was a mistake that I made, which is, don't starve program and technology in order to avoid cutting people. So a lot of times when you're asked to cut, everyone's like, well, I can't let any of my people go. Instead, I'm going to cut program and technology because those are easier to do. A recommended ratio is 40-40-20. Great people in marketing need money in the form of program spend and technology to actually be really effective. Because remember, marketing is not like sales. You're not talking one-to-one to people. Rather, you're trying to use infrastructure to go get in front of a lot of people and bring them in at scale. And that means that you need budget and you need technology to be able to do that effectively. One question that we often get about CAC is, most folks don't have infrastructure in place to measure CAC in real time. And so the question is, well, when should we be doing that? Is that infrastructure we should be investing in? I would say, like Henry laid it out, the first thing I would do is just, even if you don't have any infrastructure to get real-time CAC data, is just take a step back and calculate what the CAC is at the program level. You may have to make some estimates. You might be like, oh, I have one person working on 2 programs. Just take a guess as to where they go. And the goal here is you're trying to get an authentic sense of how well that program is performing. And so you don't want to lie to yourself. So just be as honest as you can, take a guess and start to calculate your program. Everybody and every program cost and every technology has to be allocated to something. And then make that measurement. That's something you can do in a couple of days, shouldn't be too hard. And then once you've done that, as you start to move towards profitable growth, I recommend building more infrastructure around the programs that are really expensive and that have moved out of experimental mode. So for example, at Gusto, we had really good CAC infrastructure for paid programs because millions of dollars went into those programs. But if something was new and experimental, we wouldn't go and invest a ton in getting real-time CAC data from something like that. So, you don't have to all of a sudden get to 10 out of 10 on sophistication. At Mutiny, we do our program level CAC measurements and calculations on a quarterly basis. So because we're, Series B company, our ACV is pretty high, so we haven't needed to build that real-time CAC investment just yet, but that is something that we will be building for our more expensive programs in the near future. All right, so moving on to the next section here, conversion. So most companies tend to focus on one main lever for driving growth, and that is demand. Now, that's a really important lever that you definitely want to invest in because you need to make people aware of you, right? As a startup, people don't know who you are, and so you definitely need to spend effort on that. And also, you can affect the quality of the audience through your demand programs. You can send in really good leads and really good pipeline, or you can send really bad ones. And so there is definitely a really strong relationship between demand and revenue. However, in the past 5 or so years, what we've seen from the best companies is that you can actually programmatically invest in conversion as a lever in order to further drive efficiency and revenue. So this is something that started with companies like Airbnb, Uber, Pinterest, the B2C ones, and then spread to SMB focused companies. And now we're seeing it become adopted more broadly across B2B, whether they're doing ABM or PLG. We did this at Gusto really effectively when we had optimized a lot in our demand programs and saw that we were still losing a ton of those folks before they turned into revenue. And so in the early days, we were converting 40% of the people that were signing up for us because we were selling to one audience of founders. As we expanded, that's when we saw the conversion rates really break down. And that's when we realized that we need to continuously invest in conversion and give all of these different audiences the right experience if we want to continue to grow as fast as possible within our unit economics. And so we built a dedicated engineering team and we started investing in conversion through form optimization, personalization, onboarding optimization, in-app stuff. And that was one of the reasons we were able to grow really quickly. And this was in really strong partnership with our product team. Now, it's shocking how much revenue is locked in conversion. So I want to share an example of what a revenue funnel looks like if you are only investing in demand. Here we have 100,000 website visitors and they convert to leads, opportunities, and customers. The conversion rates here are very standard for a B2B company. And that generates $1 million in new ARR every month. Now, if you compare that to a company that is also systematically investing in conversion with relatively nominal changes in conversion rate, say on website visitors to lead by 35% increase, you're able to almost double the revenue. And that's because your best customers are the ones that are raising their hand and are engaging with you. And with very high ROI, you're able to turn them into actual customers and revenue and repeat revenue. And to show you some examples of this, Notion, they solve a wide range of problems for customers, from being a replacement to Google Docs to wikis and project management. And so they were bidding on a lot of different keywords. And when those customers would come in, they would see the same Notion website. And so what they did is they started personalizing and aligning the website to the keywords that the customer was coming in from. So if they were looking for wiki, the Notion website would transform to, hey, here's how Notion can be used for a wiki solution. And that increased their conversion rate by 60%. And so you can look at it as a reduction of 60% in the cost of advertising. But for companies like us that are trying to grow as fast as possible, you actually just take that delta, that surplus, and you put it right back into your top of funnel and you grow faster. And this is why if you invest in both levers, you can grow a lot more quickly as a company. It's still a secret these days, but it's starting to become more widely adopted. Another example, Dropbox DocSend, they have a lot of freemium users, and so on their website, when they would get a freemium user, instead of showing them the same website and the same CTA, which was typically start for free, they would change that to an upgrade CTA and change the message to highlight why an upgrade would be beneficial for the customer, increase their conversions to paid for that audience by 110%. So these are just some examples. Usually the lifts that you can get in conversion are quite high. The thing that I say to folks is a lot of times I'll hear from CMOs, oh, we're investing in conversion. We've got some guy in the basement who's like using Google Optimize for free to run 3 tests a quarter or a year. We're talking about something closer to, like, say your marketing team is 95% demand, 5% conversion. You should get to 10, 20% relatively quickly to start to see these types of results. And then eventually, the aspirational target is to get to 40%, 50% invested in conversion versus demand. That's when the growth engine is really humming and optimizing. If you want to learn more about this, we're hosting an event. You can go to thesecondlever.com along with a bunch of other folks. The focus of this event is how do you drive conversion without engineers? So the focus is all on no-code tooling and technology that's become available in the past few years that helps you drive conversion without necessarily building something as sophisticated as an engineering data science team like we did at Gusto or like some of these B2C companies are doing. And you'll hear specific case studies from like Snowflake, Attentive, Ramp on exactly how they've implemented and what value they've gotten out of it. You'll be able to ask questions. We'll also have workshops from agencies that offer this as a service. And so you'll be able to learn a little bit more about that. All right. With that, I don't see any questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and keep going to the next section. New programs. I am such a nerd on how to launch new programs to make them cost effective. And First Round did a deep dive interview with me on this topic, and we laid out a 6-step framework for how to launch new programs in a way that is very cost effective and very, very fast. Because typically what happens with new programs is that your team goes into a basement and they plan and plan and plan, and then they release something, which is really the opposite of how you're probably approaching product development. But for some reason on the go-to-market side, this hasn't yet caught on. And so people want to build beautiful programs. They want to uphold brand standards, and they end up taking this approach that ends up being really expensive and not conducive to learning. And so you can take a look at this article. We fully lay out the blueprint in that. And in the interest of time, what I'll do is just share 2 lessons from that article that I think anybody can implement regardless of what stage of company you're at. The first one is a 90-minute meeting that reveals the top 5 levers of any new big program using a technique that we call black hat technique. So the way that this works is you bring the cross-functional group that's going to work on the program. Ideally, it's not just a marketing team. And you share the goal for the program. In 1 year, what are you trying to achieve? Make this inspiring, but also accurate relative to what you want to achieve. And then what you do is you ask, okay, it's 1 year from now, and we failed at our goal. We did not achieve this. What went wrong? And you let the team brainstorm for about 20 to 30 minutes on all of the possible problems that could have gone wrong. And once you've done that and you've exhausted the possibilities, you pick out the top 5, like the ones that would be the most problematic if they went wrong, or the riskiest ones that you feel the least certain about. And then what I like to do is, instead of like leaving them in the problem format, I like to just flip them into a positive statement, so that it turns into essentially your hypothesis about this program. So then what you end up with 5 core hypotheses that must be true for you to be successful at this program. And so I will show you a simple example of how that might work. At Mutiny, we have an agency program, right? So for us, the goal was acquire 1,000 agencies that can sell Mutiny as a managed service. So far, we had been selling Mutiny as a, direct to consumer. We've made it very easy to use, so people can just go ahead and start using it. There's a lot of AI involved in it. But we think that we can build a really big partner channel in addition to the direct channel. And so we set a goal around this. Now, in our brainstorm, one thing that might have come up is maybe agencies can't learn personalization as well as we do. And therefore, they're not very effective at managing it at offering it as a managed service. That's a very reasonable problem for someone to bring up, right? And so when you create the foil of that, the statement is that we can certify agencies to successfully offer personalization services in less than 6 months. If we can do this, then we no longer have to worry about this problem, right? And so we ended up with 5 of these that we think are going to be very important for us to achieve if we are to achieve this goal. The beauty of this method, it's only 90 minutes, is that you're essentially teaching first principles thinking, and the ability to identify core levers to folks that are not engineers, right? This is a skill that's taught to engineers, but for everybody else with this method, I've seen everybody be really successful at getting to the core pieces of a program without necessarily in-depth training. Now, once people understand this, they can focus on de-risking the riskiest lever, right? They can just move forward in a much more deliberate and focused way, as opposed to looking at the program as one giant monolithic thing that they have to release into the wild at the same time in perfect form. The second nugget that I wanted to share here is the importance of shipping something in the first 1 to 2 weeks. And the way that we do that is through setting what I call motion goals. So if you've ever pushed a box, you'll notice that initially when it's not moving, it's really hard. Once it starts moving, it's actually easier to move it because you've gone from static friction to kinetic friction. The exact same thing is true when you're launching a new program that's new to your team. And so an example of an example of goals is you could say in the first 2 weeks, right? We've just done our 90-minute kickoff. So for the first 2 weeks, let's go research partner programs, talk to all of the people that are doing partner programs, and build a deck that we can share with partners. That seems really reasonable, right? It feels like progress. But actually, a much better goal for the team, a motion goal, is sign 1 partner next week. When you do that, first of all, it's terrifying because you're like, oh my God, I don't have my ducks in a row. I don't want to get in front of partners. But what it does is it gets you to go through so many more motions in this program, right? Instead of just perfecting that first step, you're going all the way to, you're trying to sell somebody, which means you're out there researching partners. So you're better understanding your TAM. You are reaching out to the partners. So you're figuring out what's going to be messaging that's going to get them to even get on a call with you. You're pitching probably 5 to 10 partners if your goal is to close one, which means that you don't even have time to put in a beautiful deck together. You've just shown them the crux of the program. And now the partner can react to you. And maybe you got major things wrong, like the rev share program. Like they don't even care about a rev share program. Like you actually should be focusing on something totally different. And so you're able to uncover all of these learnings extremely quickly. If you implement these 2 things, I promise you that your team will use half as much money and operate twice as fast. because from this point on, they're now in kinetic friction and they have an understanding of the core levers. And so they're able to move a lot more quickly. Obviously, we have weekly goals, we have learning meetings, there's more steps to this framework, but these are the two things that at a minimum, anybody can implement. There was a question here on what is a good rule of thumb for good conversion. So the answer to this is going to be really unsatisfying. And the more we have learned about conversion, the more I've become convinced that it really depends on your company. So what you want to do is get benchmarks from companies that have a similar business model to you. If you are selling a product that requires significant consideration, then a 2% conversion rate on a website is not that bad. Like even sometimes, like if it's really high ACV, sometimes even a 1% conversion rate. But I would say if you have a 1% conversion rate with improvements to your website, you should get yourself to at least 2% plus. But if you're selling a product that has a free trial or a freemium usage, you might get as high as 10% conversion rate. I've seen as high as 12, 13% conversion rate. So my recommendation is find businesses that are similar to you in business model. They don't have to be your direct competitor, just similar in terms of the effort required to take that first step with you. And then from there, benchmark yourself to that. And the goal is to keep improving your own conversion rate. So our conversion rate at Mutiny is totally different than our conversion rate at Gusto. But the important thing is that we're continuously trying to improve it at every step of the funnel. So that matters a lot more than arbitrarily forcing a conversion rate on your team. Hope that answers your question. Let me know if it doesn't. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Henry to walk through operating cadence.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so operating cadence, there's a lot of different ways to do this. Our goal here was just to share some things that have worked well for us in the past. And I think like as we were thinking about what's going to be most useful here, one of the core pieces of our advice was to really design something that works for you. So it needs to be intentional, it needs to be tops down. And if you get this right, it's one of the best tools that we found for improving execution. And again, more so than the specific version, which we're going to share a version that we use here, approaching it with design principles is the most important thing. Thank you, Jaleh. So I think like the part of the reason it's so important to have intention here is that the team around you has probably worked in hundreds of different versions of an operating cadence. And it's important to say, this is how we are doing it here. These are the set of people that are meeting at this time with this goal. And these are the dashboards that we're reviewing. And these are the goals of those meetings. Otherwise, it can quickly become a mishmash of poorly defined, redundant meetings. And the problem only gets worse as you scale. It's kind of manageable until you're about 20 people, but you really need something intentional as soon as you get beyond that. So the three key parts of our quarterly process. First piece starts with an offsite culminating in our quarterly OKRs. The second meeting is more of a pipeline meeting. It's meant to just really quickly keep up with our programs and see how we're doing towards weekly goals. And the third meeting is a growth strategy meeting for longer term, more strategic topics, making sure we make space for those as we go throughout the quarter as well. All right, so for OKRs, we generally kick off with guidance from the leadership team on 3, maybe 4 key objectives. And we use the time together at our offsite to plan the set of initiatives that we think is most likely to achieve that set of goals. So our quarterly OKRs always derive from long-term vision and strategy. We try to cascade this all the way through. Definitely try to reinforce that at every single offsite or quarterly planning cycle that we have. And we won't leave this offsite until we've confirmed the objectives. We have measurable key results that we, actually have team buy-in on and have a way to actually track as we go throughout the quarter, and that these things have been communicated to the entire team. So this also includes confirmation of detailed hiring plans and detailed growth targets by program, including where possible, activity level metrics, like what is the thing that we actually have to do at the most detailed level. So following that, this target setting process, target setting and objective setting, measurement is really critical. And these are measuring really the key results and the growth targets here. So what we recommend is creating a MICI revenue dashboard to track progress towards these targets. So MICI meaning a mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, old consulting term, but really what this boils down to is you have full coverage into the levers you have for hitting your growth goals. You want to avoid at all costs that world in which a team can hit all the team level targets and then somehow the company's missed, its most important objectives at the end of the quarter. We also try to keep this dashboard to under 10 stable summary metrics and align those metrics to specific business owners so that if we do start to deviate from the target, we have someone, it's just 100% clear, who do we need to talk to figure out how to diagnose what's going on and help coordinate a path back towards plan. Doesn't mean they're solely responsible for all the work associated with that, but they're just the one who's going to understand what's going on and can cross-functionally work with the team to get us back to a better place. All right, so the kind of going from this quarterly, monthly concept, making sure at a very high level we're progressing to our targets. One of the things that we found really helpful here is breaking these quarterly targets into weekly goals, and it's had a very meaningful impact on our program performance. So now as part of our offsites, we break down the quarterly numbers into weekly targets as a team. And this allows us in week 1 or week 2 to quickly spot where there's issues, or on the flip side, where we're really outperforming and something that we want to understand and potentially double down on. So this is absolutely critical for us, and it has just been a real accelerant towards us in making sure we get to where we wanted to go when we set out the quarter. It also avoids the situation of tallying up the score at the end of the quarter and discovering something didn't go as planned. Last point that I'll make here is on the program performance, and you can see this in the bottom left panel there. Actually, Jaleh, if you wouldn't mind popping back one slide there. We've invested very heavily in having what we would consider operator level metrics. So in this case, outbound outreaches aligned directly into our financial model. So it's really valuable for us to know how the activity level, growth lever, outbound outreaches in this case, ultimately ladders up to our highest level ARR goal. So in this example below, and in our financial model and the model that we use as an operating team, we know how outbound outreaches impacts leads in that channel, impacts new customers in that channel, and ultimately the new ARR that we're generating in that channel. And as a company, having this alignment between operating teams, finance teams, and the leadership team, all using the same metrics, talking the same language, produces this hands on the steering wheel effect that's really powerful. The last thing I'll share here is a sample of our standing agenda for our go-to-market leadership team that we use to keep a pulse on revenue. So this team, what we call the go-to-market leadership team, includes leaders from sales, from marketing, from our CSM team, and from our finance and biz ops team as well. So we kick off this meeting with a review of the summary dashboard that we look at together, make sure we're pacing towards where we want to be. And then we have the team leaders walk through their goals, including the forward-looking forecast of where they think they're going to be. So it's not just a retrospective look, it's also forward-looking as they look ahead to the next month or week or the remainder of the quarter. They're developing a point of view on what's going to be challenging to hit or where they think there's additional opportunities. Finally, this bottom section here, we extend this meeting once a week for 30 minutes to create space for strategic topics. And this can be things like sales hiring plans, a pricing rollout, why we're winning or losing deals, so spending a little bit more time there. Having some venue where the team can talk about these things is really critically important for making sure you're not getting too in the weeds and too tactical in your approach to any given quarter. So that's the last thing that I had on operating cadence. With that, I'll hand it back to Jaleh to wrap us up. Thank you again.
Awesome. Happy to take a couple of questions here. A couple of things that I wanted to emphasize on the operating cadence. You probably heard the words like MICI and weekly a lot. We're huge fans. Like you want me see everything because that's what allows you to not miss anything. And the other thing is just a lot of teams, they have marketing has their own metrics and they meet with each other. You have sales and, everybody's doing that. The key is to have a forum where everyone is there. That's the only way for you to ultimately get to revenue efficiency and measurement. There's a question here on, is having a VP of marketing and VP of sales on the same level still a good organizational model, or would a VP of revenue who looks at programs instead of lead to opportunity be better suited? So I've seen both models. So for example, I think ultimately consolidation is good. I've never regretted as a leader consolidation, whether it was on the marketing team and let's say we brought organic and paid together into, demand gen holistically, or as a CEO combining programs into a goal that, a very senior leader can then oversee. I think that's a really good thing. However, not every organization is going to allow for that. And so what I recommend is that for you to be able to look at revenue efficiency, like you don't necessarily need one leader to do that. At Mutiny right now, we have separate CSM, sales, and marketing leaders because the stage of the company that we're at, that works better for us right now. And so everything that Henry shared, as long as you're intentional about that operating cadence design, everything still works. But if we were to let it be a free-for-all and marketing is designing their own goals, and then absolutely, all hell would break loose, and you would need one leader to manage everybody to even have a shot at organization. All right, awesome. And I think with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.